Monday, September 14th, 2015, was remembered by 16-year-old Nolan Buchanan as the best day of his life. The day before, he had spent Sunday with his girlfriend. A traditional morning mass with his girlfriend's family, followed by a get-together with friends and a wonderfully romantic evening. Waking up on Monday morning next to his favorite girl, the teenager felt like a free, successful, and influential businessman, before whom the whole world is open. After all, he was now the owner of Buchanan Construction. The young man was going to inherit cars, a house, land, monetary assets, and made plans how he would manage the family business alone, and certainly do it better than his father, who brought the company to bankruptcy. It would seem that what could go wrong? Already on October 1st, 2015, Nolan Keith Buchanan was arrested at Bonita High School in Bonita, California by the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. Nolan was incarcerated at the Juvenile Treatment Center, JTC, in South Lake Tahoe until June 13, 2018, when an El Dorado County jury of 7 men and 5 women found Buchanan guilty of 3 charges. The jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. The young man was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole from the 25th year of his sentence. This is how his plan to take over the family business ended. Neighbors and classmates spoke of Nolan as a model kid and a good student. As far as I know, he was a good kid, Anita High School student Campbell Ruxton would later say in an interview. He always cared about school. He seemed very kind. He was very nice. I'm even surprised he was arrested. But what really happened in the Buchanan family? Let's break down this horrific case in detail. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she came to apply for a job at his firm as an office manager. By the time they met, Adam was already divorced and raising his son Nolan from a previous marriage on his own. Cheerful, sociable, and cheerful blonde immediately attracted the attention of the owner of the company. The interest was mutual. Molly fell in love, started a romance that turned into a serious relationship, and her move to Adam. Molly dreamed of a real loving, friendly family and tried to build a wonderful relationship with her stepson. Soon she became pregnant. Gavin was born. People who knew the Buchanans claimed that they were a fairly close-knit family of 4. The head of the family, who owned a construction company, earned enough to ensure a comfortable life, and the family even purchased vacation property in El Dorado County, California. A small cabin sat on 19 acres in Greenwood, a rustic cabin with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. Adam, who worked in construction, took an active role in remodeling the house, and the family began to visit there often. On September 13, 2015, at 10 a.m., members of the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township in western El Dorado County on Highway 193 between Cool and Georgetown. Upon arrival, they found the fire had destroyed 10 acres of the property. Cabin located on the property was still smoldering, but had burned to the ground. The fire department personnel observed charred remains in the ashes. The scene of the fire was not touched, and at 11 a.m. firefighters called the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. No one had yet realized what was at the scene. Firefighters were almost certain that the victim of the wildfire was a pet trapped in the house. The arriving coroner was faced with a daunting task. The remains of the house were still smoldering, and there was no way to examine the inside of the house. They had to wait for the flames to finally die down and for the temperature to drop slightly. As the coroner examined the house, he smelled the sweet odor of burnt flesh and later discovered a human skull and a burned chest. It appeared that the tragedy had claimed someone's life. The officer requested backup. Officers from the sheriff's office arrived and conducted a thorough examination of the scene. The conclusion was obvious. The small, secluded, and remote cabin was not the primary residence of its owners. Rather, it was most likely a country cabin where people came to vacation. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the property adjacent to the cabin. It was possible to run the license plates and find out who the car belonged to. The owner may have been the victim of the wildfire. It didn't take long to find out that the vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by a man named Adam Buchanan. The man in question lived 160 miles from the scene of the accident, about 3 hours away in Bonita, California. This information confirmed the assumption of the police, who decided that the house was just a country residence for those who vacation here from the hustle and bustle of the city. It remained to be seen who was inside, Mr. Buchanan himself or someone else. The name of the owner of the company gave the detectives their first clue, with which they began their investigation. The Bonita police officers were tasked with checking to see if all of Buchanan's family members were well and at home. They went to the correct address and were soon in the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. At a knock on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage came out. He greeted the uniformed officers with surprise and asked what brought them to him. The officers decided to first find out who was in the house so as not to frighten the household. Perhaps the company car had been taken by someone from the company and not the owner himself. Nolan Buchanan said his father, Adam, had gone away for the weekend to his country estate 160 miles away with Molly and their 8-year-old son, Gavin, and they were due back in the evening. According to him, his father had left him to look after the house. Investigators did not yet have sufficient reason to believe the remains in the cabin were those of the Buchanans, but the information received and the discovery of the remains, believed to be those of 2 people, by the evening of September 13th was enough to report the family missing in the El Dorado County fire. The next day, September 14th, El Dorado County Police went to Nolan's home to talk to him more thoroughly and try to figure out whose lives the fire had claimed. Officers were met by Adam's parents, Howard and Susan Buchanan. They said that their son, the owner of the burned-out cabin, does his own home repairs and therefore travels there very often. The parents were very concerned as they had not been able to contact their son or daughter-in-law until now. From the story, the officers learned that the house is connected to generators. But at the time of the tragedy, it had no electricity. There were, however, gas cylinders inside. This gave 2 theories. The fire could have been either accidental or intentional. By September 15th, the fire scene had cooled down and investigators were finally able to collect evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit. According to Denton James Peterson of the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, new remains were discovered that changed the direction of the case. Police found a piece of skull with a bullet hole. At that point, we all realized that there was actually a homicide. This was not an accidental fire, reported the sheriff. The remains were collected and sent for forensic DNA testing. In the first set of remains, the bullet was lodged in the victim's thigh. The skull with the bullet hole, judging by its size, belonged to a child. The version of fatal accident dropped by itself. The version of murder came to the forefront. No one now doubted that the fire was a means of destroying the traces of the crime. It remained to find out under what circumstances the crime had taken place. Was it a burglary that had gone wrong? Or had the family taken their lives deliberately? But then by whom and why? Or could the crime be related to Buchanan Construction, a company where Adam Buchanan was president and chief operating officer, and someone harbored a grudge against him due to a working relationship? Initially, investigators focused specifically on the latter theory. They also looked into Molly's life to determine if she had any enemies capable of the crime. Once those lines of inquiry stalled, officers turned their attention to problems in Molly and Adam's marriage. There proved to be plenty of them. Investigators learned that over time, Molly and Adam's relationship began to deteriorate, and at the time of the crime, they had been sleeping apart for quite some time. A diary was found in which Molly described abuse from Adam. Witnesses interviewed described rough treatment and abuse. According to them, Adam was rude not only to Molly but also to the children. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, admitted to investigators, "There were times when I was afraid they would kill each other in one of their arguments." Molly did not sever her relationship with Adam, but would periodically take her son and leave to go to her parents' house and return a few days later until the next fight. It also turned out that the couple liked to hunt in the area where their country house was located. Since everyone was armed, the investigators assumed that during another quarrel, one of the spouses grabbed a gun and shot. And when he realized what he had done, he took his own life. However, there was an inconsistency. If the tragedy happened because of a conflict between husband and wife, it means that near the remains of one of them must necessarily be the instrument of crime, which, however, was not. Investigators speculated that the weapon may have been damaged in the fire and may not have looked as obvious as expected. Over the course of 5 days, forensic team members took turns removing ashes from the home. The search was conducted with surgical thoroughness, but did not yield the expected result. No weapons were found in the house. By this time came the data of forensic examination. The examination confirmed that the DNA of the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds before the fire, and the angle of the bullet wounds ruled out the version that someone took their own life. The lack of firearms meant that someone else was in the house. A 4th person who shot the Buchanans, and the investigation had to start over. Police had no choice but to turn to the 16-year-old son of the deceased. Nolan told officers that the family drove away in an old Dodge truck. According to the son, his father decided to use the company vehicle rather than his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway, because he had loaded the truck and trailer with rocks that he was going to decorate the area near his country cabin. It was this truck that police found near the burn structure. When asked why Nolan did not go on vacation with his relatives, the young man, as in the first interview, said that he had a duty to look after the house and garden during the absence of his father and stepmother. Nolan also said that they had a neighbor growing forbidden grass on the edge of the Buchanan property, which caused his father to have frequent arguments with this neighbor, demanding that he stop planting the grass and threatening to go to the police. Talking about the family business, Nolan told of the company's financial difficulties. Things were not going well. The company was undergoing downsizing and the number of employees was down to 5. From what his father said, the debts associated with the business were increasing rapidly. So now the investigation had a lot of useful information. And the detectives had a suspect, a neighbor, especially since in that area violent crime was often linked to the cultivation of illegal herbs. Detectives felt that the threat of going to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family. The problem was no one had any idea which neighbor they were talking about. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing all the homeowners in a row. The tactic was successful. They found a man who confirmed the story of a quarrel with Adam over growing a forbidden crop. But according to him, after a sharp conversation, the conflict was over. The neighbor had an alibi and another version turned out to be untenable. What remained to be dealt with was the financial crisis that had hit the family's business. On September 18th, the police visited Adam's company and interviewed the employees. Nolan's words were true. The company was in a sorry state. It was threatened with bankruptcy, as the amount of debts exceeded $30,000. Because of this, some employees were fired. It turned out that some of the former employees were extremely dissatisfied with the reduction and therefore could be involved in the crime. And that's where investigators got lucky. Over the weekend, the local high school organized a community cleanup day. The students were clearing debris from a business park just a mile from Adam's construction company. It was there on September 19th that a small purse with a wallet and identification cards belonging to Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan was found under one of the bushes. A .22 caliber rifle was lying nearby. Detectives immediately went to the scene of the discovery. The county sheriff's office made a new assumption. The perpetrator had massacred the Buchanan family with the found rifle and covering his tracks, had taken their documents from the crime scene. The discovery was important because it meant that someone had traveled all the way to Greenwood to kill the family and then returned to Bonita to dispose of the bag and murder weapon. It appeared to be a Bonita resident. The proximity of the evidence found to the location of Buchanan Construction strengthened the theory that the boss was massacred by one of the disgruntled employees. Detectives sent the firearm and the bag of documents for examination, requesting a warrant to inspect the company's records and premises. Here, the investigators got lucky a second time. During the search, they gained access to a video surveillance camera installed on the firm's premises. By happy coincidence, the lens of the camera was directed not at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot. After this discovery, the case was just days away from being solved. Since it was already known that the family had gone out of town on Friday, investigators reviewed Friday's footage and were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had told them. Detectives realized that the young man had deliberately manipulated the investigation. If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, then someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home. Investigators re-interviewed Nolan, trying to keep him safe while getting as many details as possible. Nolan again recounted his weekend, where he had been and who he had seen. Only this time they asked him what movie they had seen at the cinema, how he had paid for the shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. The unsuspecting Nolan answered with his father's credit card. The officers then applied for a warrant to search Buchanan's home in Bonita, search the vehicles, and check financial records. The Ford automobile was still parked in the driveway. It was closely inspected, and they noticed reddish soil sticking to the wheels, similar to that in Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip last weekend or earlier, traces of soil might have remained, but they would not have been as obvious. Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed the wheel tread marks near the country house, but the dirt buildup indicated that the car had probably been to Greenwood recently. Detectives tracked the bank card payments and found that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th at fast food chain Taco Bell on his way to Greenwood. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed he stayed home, did not go with his parents, and had the credit card in his possession. Detectives went to the diner and checked the security cameras. They saw exactly what they expected, a white Ford instead of a truck. When detectives searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th that included not 3 but 4 drinks. Evidence collected at the scene of the fire similarly pointed to 4 drink cups. So Nolan was in the car? The next credit card transaction took place on Saturday, September 12th at the Valencia Club Bar in Penryn, about 30 minutes away from the cabin. Adam's parents had previously told detectives about the bar. They said their son and daughter-in-law liked to drop in there after renovations to the cabin. Security cameras recorded the time the couple left the bar, and traffic cameras on the highway helped track the couple's route. A Ford F-150 headed toward the Buchanan cabin around 2:30 a.m. on the day of the fire, and at 3:30 a.m. drove in the opposite direction. In the first instance, the camera captured Adam and Molly in the vehicle, and in the second, only Nolan. A few hours later, on Sunday morning, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used to pay at 3 of Bonita's establishments, Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station. The bank confirmed to investigators that Buchanan had only one bank card. The facts contradicted Nolan's stories. By this time, forensic results had come back. Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun. He was arrested right in the middle of a high school class. Nolan Buchanan pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. He attempted to distort the story and claimed that it was his father who shot the family, after which he pointed a rifle at him, and he, defending himself, took the weapon away, accidentally shooting his father. Nolan insisted it was self-defense, attributing the fire and subsequent lie to a state of panic and extreme fright. That's why he took gasoline and set the house on fire to make it look like nothing had happened there. The defense continually focused the jury's attention on Adam's abuse of his own son and other family members. The medical examiner questioned the verdict because the bullet wound mark on a piece of Gavin's skull was consistent with a shot fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed that his and his brother's beds were next to each other and they were simultaneously awakened by the noise and screaming. It was at the moment of awakening that Nolan allegedly saw someone enter the bedroom and shoot Gavin. The shooter then pointed the rifle at him, and Nolan miraculously managed to push the attacker away. Under this scenario, the shot would have been fired at about a 45-degree angle, which was inconsistent with forensic evidence. The prosecution came to believe that Nolan shot his brother when they were alone in the house while their parents spent time at a bar. After waiting for his father and stepmother to return, Nolan shot them as well. Judging by where the bodies were found, Adam was killed first, followed by Molly. Nolan then took the rifle, his parents' papers, doused the bodies with gasoline, and set the house on fire. Then he went home, met his girlfriend, and spent the day with her, creating an alibi for himself. On July 13, 2018, a jury found Nolan guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Judge Kingsbury, in announcing the sentence, reflected on the verbal and physical abuse Nolan faced, on the testimony that Nolan massacred his brother because he didn't want him to go through the same horror or be forced to live with what his father had already managed to do to him. But as she did, she also listed facts about the premeditation of the crime and subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and the plans to run the family business that Nolan had voiced to family members. The judge cited a failure to follow rules and deviant behavior noted by staff at the South Lake Tahoe Juvenile Treatment Center, where Nolan went after his arrest. "Everyone has the opportunity to change," Judge Kingsbury told Nolan. "I hope you will do everything in your power to do so. If you behave well, you will have a chance to get out on parole in 25 years under the Senate bill and Supreme Court rulings. It's up to you whether you take that chance or not." Nolan continues to insist he is innocent. If he ever gets out on parole, he will have to pay a huge compensation to the victims. The amount of the payout is unknown at this time. It was a beautiful summer day on June 19, 1970, when two young men decided to take a leisurely stroll on Independence Pass in Twin Lakes, Colorado. The air was crisp and the sun shone brightly, making the day perfect for a hike. However, their adventure took an unexpected turn when they stumbled upon something ghastly. As they walked down the road, they noticed a decomposed body of a man lying in a ditch on the north side. It was partially covered with rocks that had fallen from the slope above. But that wasn't the worst part. As the two men got closer, they noticed that the entire left arm and rib cage of the body were missing. It was a gruesome sight, and their hearts raced with fear and confusion. The body was dressed in a tattered sweatshirt and gray trousers, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. Who was this man? What had happened to him? There were questions that plagued their minds as they stood there stunned by what they had just discovered. Without wasting a single moment, the two men contacted the authorities, who arrived at the scene with a sense of urgency. As they approached the decomposed body, they suspected that the man was in his early 20s. The officers carefully examined the scene, taking note of every detail that could help them solve the mystery. In addition to the missing left arm and rib cage, the officers also noticed that the man was wearing 3 pairs of socks and hiking shoes. They even found a sock pulled over his left shoe. But that wasn't the only odd thing they found. Upon searching the man's pockets, they found $7 and a razor. But those items offered little insight into the man's identity or the circumstances of his death. No wallet or ID was found on the man, leaving the officers to wonder who he was and what had happened to him. Officers also extensively searched the area around the body, hoping to find any clues, but to no avail. The man's remains were quickly removed from the scene and taken for analysis, but despite their best efforts, detectives couldn't identify him. They scoured missing person reports, interviewed locals, and even searched through dental records, but nothing seemed to match. The man was a complete enigma, and the mystery only deepened as they delved deeper. The officers were perplexed by the condition of the body. It seemed as though the man had been out in the elements for a long time, possibly all winter. Yet his clothing didn't seem appropriate for such harsh conditions. The officers also couldn't help but wonder what could have happened to the missing body parts. Had they been removed post-mortem, or had they been eaten by wild animals? It was a gruesome thought, but it was a possibility they couldn't ignore. The officers could only speculate until a shocking discovery was made. On July 15, 1970, more than 3 weeks after the body was found, a state highway maintenance man found the missing limb below the road where the body had been discovered. The shoulder and arm were stripped down to the bone, but the hand and wrist still had flesh on them. The discovery only deepened the mystery. How had the limb ended up there, and why was it separated from the body? The condition in which the body part was found was perplexing, leading the officers to speculate that it could have been removed after the man died, possibly by a snowplow, but they had no concrete evidence. As the years passed, the mysterious man found Independence Pass became nothing more than a forgotten memory. The lack of identification left him with no name and was simply identified as Independence Pass John Doe. He was relegated to the status of an unknown soul buried beneath a simple marker reading, "Unidentified Male," in the Evergreen Cemetery of Leadville. The case went cold, and as time marched on, It seemed that the truth behind Independence past John Doe's identity would remain a mystery forever. In 2011, a man named John Pearson, who had devoted years to cleaning up the Evergreen Cemetery, stumbled upon the grave of the Independence past John Doe while cleaning an overgrown section. Pearson, who was also a Vietnam veteran, couldn't help but be curious about the man's identity. He wondered if perhaps Independence past John Doe too was a fellow veteran of the Vietnam War. Pearson's curiosity led him to reach out to Audrey Simpkins, a crime and intelligence analyst with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, who then enlisted the help of Sylvia Pedham, an expert in identifying John and Jane Does. Together they journeyed to the small town in August 2011, eager to uncover the truth behind the mysterious grave. But despite their efforts, the case once again grew cold, leaving Independence past John Doe's identity shrouded in secrecy for a little while longer. In 2013, after 2 years of silence, the case of the Independence past John Doe started to gain momentum. Audrey and Sylvia returned to Leadville and searched for the case records, only to find out that they were missing. Together with the then coroner Shannon Kent, they made sure that the case details were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Systems database. Sylvia, a determined woman, then asked the Lake County Sheriff to exhume the remains of the John Doe to enable DNA sampling. The body was exhumed, and with the help of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, a fingerprint was obtained. DNA was extracted from the John Doe's femur and skull at the University of Northern Texas, and hope was renewed for finally identifying the unknown man. But instead of being laid to rest in his grave at Evergreen Cemetery, John Doe's body remained in a casket in the office of former Lake County Coroner Shannon. It took 8 long years for the man to finally be reburied. In the quiet of 2022, a breakthrough was made in the decades-long case. A team of detectives submitted DNA extracted from the unidentified John Doe for forensic genetic genealogy testing. The test yielded a promising lead. Details of this lead remain shrouded in mystery, but it was enough to crack the case wide open. Finally, after all these years, John Doe had a name, Gardner Paul Smith, who would have been just 39 years old when his remains were discovered. Gardner was no longer just a nameless body in a grave. He had a story, a life, and a family. Born in Modesto, California on September 22, 1930, Gardner was the older son of Paul and Bernita Smith and grew up in a skiing family. Both of his parents were skiers, and it was only natural that Gardner and his younger brother, Moore, took up the sport. For Gardner, skiing was more than a hobby. It was a way of life. He attended the University of Nevada in Reno, where he not only studied but also competed on the college ski team. Gardner's dedication to the sport was admirable, and he was always pushing himself to improve. In fact, he was known to experiment with different techniques, once even attempting giant slalom courses on cross-country skis to work on his balance. But Gardner was more than just an athlete. He was a deep thinker and a humanist, always seeking to understand what it truly meant to be alive. In the latter part of his life, he became fascinated with psychic phenomena and the powers of the mind, and he wanted to unlock the secrets of human consciousness, and he spent countless hours exploring this area of study. In June 1951, Gardner was just a young man when he joined the Army, serving 2 years of active duty, and then transferring to the reserves where he served for more years. He did his duty honorably and was discharged in June 1957. Gardner's path eventually led him to Argentina, where he met the love of his life, Jennifer Dawn Andrews, in 1961. The two got married, and Gardner brought his new bride back to California. It wasn't long before they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Jean, into the world on June 18, 1962. However, at some point, Gardner left his wife and young daughter. Jennifer eventually obtained a divorce from Gardner in 1968 and went on to marry Ernest M. Dillard. Unfortunately, Ernest passed away in 1974, leaving Jennifer a widow once again. As for Gardner, he drifted between California and Aspen, seemingly unable to settle down after his divorce. Dick Dorworth, an accomplished ski racer and Gardner's longtime friend, vividly recalls the last time he saw him in 1968. Gardner, who was living life on the road, was trying to promote a new ski pole grip he had designed. This was not the first invention he had created, as he had also come up with double-lens goggles but had failed to market it. After a week of crashing on his friend's couch, Gardner vanished into the unknown, never to be seen by Dorworth again. In fact, the last anyone heard from Gardner was through a postcard he sent to his mother dated November 12, 1969. Simply read, "I am doing all right, don't worry, love Gardner." At the time, his mother was hopeful, but little did she know that it would be the last that she would ever hear from her son. Gardner's daughter Jean was filled with unanswered questions about her father who disappeared when she was just a baby. For years, she was left to wonder where he had gone and why he never came back for her. Her mother and family members were tight-lipped about his absence, leaving her to piece together her father's life on her own. And it wasn't until decades later in that she finally got some answers when her father's true identity was discovered. Now a 60-year-old woman with a family of her own is determined to give her father the honor he deserves. She plans to arrange a small military funeral and have a headstone made in his memory. As for where he will finally be laid to rest, Jean hasn't made up her mind yet. But one thing is for certain, she will always hold a special place in her heart for the father she never got the chance to know. The mystery surrounding Gardner Smith's death persists. While there is no record of an autopsy performed on him, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation reports that there was no evidence of foul play, and speculations about how he died continue to circulate. Some speculate he may have been the victim of a crime and his body was dumped in Independence Pass. Others suggest he may have hiked up there with the intent to hike back down, only to get caught in a sudden storm, become disoriented, and succumb to the cold. However, the truth about Gardner Smith's death remains shrouded in mystery, leaving many unanswered questions. The case of Mohammed Shamji, a brilliant surgeon, father of many, and ruthless criminal victims of domestic violence, sometimes not only endure abuse, humiliation, and beatings, but also blame themselves for what's happening. Each of these cases, when brought to the public's attention, is condemned, causing confusion and leading to many questions. Why does the victim allow themselves to be treated this way? Why don't they tell anyone? Why don't they leave their abuser? Contrary to popular belief that physical violence occurs primarily in dysfunctional families, statistics show that such incidents don't depend on the social status of spouses, their position in society, or their job titles. Mohammed Shamji and Alana Frick Shamji were not only outstanding doctors, but also true luminaries of science. Mohammed made a name for himself in neurosurgery and the treatment of spine injuries and diseases, while his wife was an equally renowned family doctor with a PhD. For years, they both saved other people's lives, yet few knew what was happening in their private lives. This story shocked the entire world, and the accused admitted his guilt only to spare his 12-year-old daughter, who had accidentally witnessed her mother's death from having to testify in court. Notably, shortly before the tragedy, Alana had posted a photo of her husband in a kimono on social media, taken during one of his jiu-jitsu training sessions, with a joking comment that this doctor could not only heal but also break a neck. This post turned out to be prophetic. Alana Frick, life before meeting Mohammed. Alana Christina Frick was born in September 1977 in the Canadian city of Windsor, located in Ontario in the southern part of the country. She was the younger of two daughters in the family of George and Anna Frick, who emigrated from Croatia to North America in the early 1970s. Alana was raised alongside her older sister, Caroline, with whom she was very close from an early age. The birth of Alana was seen as a miracle by her parents, as Anna had serious complications after her first pregnancy, and doctors had said she would never conceive again. Alana's parents worked at a large car factory, striving to provide their daughters with everything they needed and to give them a good education. Both sisters were smart and did well in school, but Alana stood out for her determination and passion for learning. She spent nearly all her free time reading books, and she also managed to attend a dance studio, practice gymnastics, and compete in track and field. During middle school, Alana chose to work during summer breaks to help her family. She worked in cornfields and even then tried to manage her budget wisely. Alana excelled in math and other sciences, and by high school, she had decided to pursue a career in medicine and become a doctor. She graduated from high school as the top student and enrolled in a prestigious medical university without issue. Around this time, she also began a romantic relationship with a man named Matthew Ryan, whom she had known since high school and who was now studying in the same department. Their student romance lasted until graduation, but afterward, Frick decided to go to Ottawa and continue her studies in the capital's university residency program. Her boyfriend settled for a job at a local hospital and didn't consider furthering his studies. Alana's and Matthew's relationship continued long distance and lasted until nearly 2002. They even planned to marry, but eventually decided to remain friends. By then, Alana was interning at one of the country's top clinics and aimed to earn a doctorate while Matthew hadn't advanced in his career. Love at first sight. In February 2003, during a night shift at the hospital, Alana went to the staff room and saw a new colleague who immediately caught her attention. The young man, Mohammed Shamji, was just a year older than Alana and was doing his residency in the neurosurgery department. Mohammed came from a family of prominent doctors. He was born and raised in Ottawa in a family of the renowned surgeon Farid Shamji and his talented psychiatrist wife, Edith. Mohammed's older brother, Ali, was an experienced medical biophysicist. Both brothers graduated from Yale University, and Mohammed later returned to Canada to earn his doctorate from Western Ontario's Research University. Mohammed was also interested in the blonde, but initially, he made no effort to approach her. Alana, however, fell for this tall, dark-skinned man at first sight and tried to attract his attention. Soon, Mohammed asked his colleagues for her number and sent her a message, and their relationship began to blossom. Alana considered Mohammed a shy and modest man. He rarely took the initiative, felt uncomfortable on dates, jumped from topic to topic, or fell silent, appearing detached and introverted. Later, it turned out these oddities weren't due to shyness, but rather a lack of interest. Mohammed was already seeing another woman, but for some reason, he kept this from his infatuated colleague. When Frick discovered the existence of a rival, she resolved to win over Mohammed and become his one and only. Their relationship was rocky during the first year, with the couple breaking up 3 times before rekindling, mainly due to Alana's persistence. Her parents were aware of this and urged her to leave Mohammed, but she stood firm, believing she had found her one true love. Alana often pampered her lover with gifts, made surprises, and brought him home-cooked meals. Mohammed seemed to just let himself be loved, readily accepting everything but reciprocating only occasionally. This one-sided game appeared to create an emotional dependence on Mohammed for Alana. Unplanned pregnancy, wedding, and the beginning of a nightmare. In the summer of 2004, Frick informed her partner that they were going to have a child. This news came as a surprise to both of them, causing more anxiety than joy. Nonetheless, Mohammed, raised in a strict conservative Muslim country, felt compelled to follow tradition and marry the mother of his child before its birth. In early September that year, the couple had a wedding with 2 ceremonies. The first adhered to all cultural customs respected by the groom's family, and the second took place among the couple's friends at one of the trendiest restaurant complexes. The newlyweds seemed happy and in love, but no one could have imagined that their marriage would be the start of a nightmare that would end in tragedy. The couple moved into a spacious house in one of Ottawa's prestigious neighborhoods. In January 2005, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Yasmina. Unfortunately, the birth of their daughter didn't strengthen their marriage. The young father was entirely focused on his career and planned to continue his education with his wife and newborn daughter taking a back seat. Moreover, Mohammed didn't hide his disappointment, as he had hoped for a son. After the birth of her child, Alana went on maternity leave, focusing on household chores and caring for her daughter. This irritated her husband, who, after returning from work, would retreat to his home office, spending little time with his wife and child. Over time, he became increasingly nervous and irritable, criticizing his wife's appearance, refusing to eat what she cooked, and calling her stupid and useless. Alana tried not to complain about her family issues, not even to close friends or parents. However, one day while talking to her mother on the phone, Mohammed, returning home in a bad mood, began berating and insulting his wife, which her mother overheard. She tried to defend her daughter, but her son-in-law blamed Alana for their crumbling marriage. Anna tried to convince her daughter to file for divorce and leave the man treating her this way. But Alana flatly refused, saying she loved her husband and would handle everything. She kept quiet about Muhammad's physical abuse, simply because the verbal abuse no longer seemed enough for him. In the summer of 2005, the situation spiraled out of control when Muhammad, in a fit of rage, punched Alana in the face, breaking her nose. Alana, with her baby in hand, fled to friends and filed a police report for domestic violence. She also decided to get a divorce and leave the man she had married for good. Unexpectedly, Muhammad began begging his wife to return, promising never to hit her again or even raise his voice. He swore he would change and that their family life would be everything Alana had ever dreamed of, and he would control his emotions. Shamji seemed sincerely remorseful, but this behavior was driven by certain circumstances. The young neurosurgeon was preparing to enroll at Duke University, aiming to earn his doctorate, and a criminal conviction could end his promising medical career. Muhammad cared only for himself and his future, but he succeeded in convincing Alana to drop the charges and not file for divorce. She even agreed to follow him to the United States, to North Carolina, where he was to continue his studies and earn a degree. A period of relative calm. Friends and family were baffled by why Alana didn't leave her tyrant husband and withdrew her police report. When she announced her intention to move to another country with Muhammad, they tried to dissuade her, but Alana stood firm, was smart, educated, driven, and ambitious, financially independent, and capable of achieving any career goal, but her destructive relationship and emotional dependence on her husband were stronger. She was ready to abandon everything and sacrifice all for a marriage that didn't bring her happiness, only suffering. However, after moving to the United States, a period of relative calm came to their family. Muhammad was admitted to an elite biomedical engineering program, difficult to enter due to the intense competition. Meanwhile, Alana enrolled in a master's program at the School of Policy and Health at Duke University, receiving a scholarship covering her tuition. The couple seemed to reconnect, spending more time together. Their relationship became stable enough that they decided to have a second child. In August 2007, they welcomed their younger daughter, Fiza. However, Muhammad again couldn't hide his disappointment, as he had hoped for a son. What does the happy family keep secret? In late summer 2009, the couple and their children returned to Canada, settling back into their home in Ottawa. This time, Alima decided not to stay on maternity leave for long, and she quickly secured a position at a prestigious hospital as a family doctor, earning a solid reputation. Meanwhile, her husband balanced work, studies, and teaching at the university. In the late 2000s, social media was gaining popularity worldwide, and the couple started a personal blog showcasing a seemingly ideal family in every sense. They posted photos of their travels, spoke about achievements in science, flaunted their luxurious lifestyle in a lavish home, attended prestigious conferences and trendy resorts, and spent time with friends at expensive restaurants. From the outside, they appeared to be a happy, successful, wealthy, and deeply in love couple with no problems, but their followers couldn't fathom what was hidden behind this facade. In reality, Muhammad again distanced himself from his wife, continuing to exert strict control over her. He carefully monitored who she interacted with, what she wore, and even checked her email and social media accounts. He openly criticized her appearance, style, and parenting methods. But Alama preferred to remain silent. Tension and aggression from Shamji grew, with him yelling at his wife and blaming her for all their arguments and discord. In 2011, the talented neurosurgeon was offered a fellowship in spinal surgery at one of the largest medical centers in Calgary. He accepted the offer, but this time he went alone, leaving his family in Ottawa since Alama couldn't leave her job. For over a year, they maintained a long-distance relationship, but during one visit home, Muhammad left his laptop on, and Alana saw a message from a woman on his social media. The content suggested they were romantically involved. When Alana directly confronted Muhammad, he didn't deny it, admitting to having an affair. This was another painful blow for Frick, and she again considered divorcing her rude, unfaithful husband. Her family was sure she wouldn't forgive him this time. Surprisingly, Alana gave their family another last chance. Muhammad promised to end his affair and said they would start fresh in Toronto, where he had been offered a prestigious, well-paying job, domestic violence, and revenge affair. Shortly after moving, Muhammad expressed his continued desire for a son, suggesting they try again. Alana agreed, thinking that having a third child might help solidify their family. In October 2013, they welcomed a long-awaited boy, named Marius. The father was happy, but his attitude toward his wife remained unchanged. Over the next few years, Shamji focused entirely on his medical career, becoming an accredited neurosurgeon with a reputation for handling the toughest and most hopeless cases that other doctors avoided. Frick also advanced, becoming a delegate for the Ontario Medical Association. However, tension between the couple began to rise again. Muhammad didn't stop at rudeness and insults, but resumed hitting the mother of his children. During a family ski vacation, Alana had a deep cut on her arm that required stitches, along with other injuries, but she claimed she hurt herself skiing. After returning home, Alana confided in her best friend that all the injuries were inflicted by her husband, following another argument over a newly discovered affair he had with a colleague. Alana had overheard part of a phone conversation between Muhammad and his mistress, and when she asked him about it, he beat her. Her friend again suggested she divorce him, and when Alana refused, joked that she should get a revenge affair. The women laughed, but the hurt wife might have thought it was a good way to get back at her cheating husband. The summer of 2016 was challenging. While the older kids were at camp and the youngest stayed with maternal grandparents, the couple's relationship completely fell apart. In early September, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, sharing the news on social media. But a week later, they spoke of divorce. Muhammad refused, stating he was content, while a desperate Alana had an affair with a colleague who had shown interest in her. She immersed herself in this new relationship, basking in the care and attention of another man, enjoying the long-forgotten feeling of being loved and desired. Did she run away with her lover, leaving her kids behind? On November 25, 2016, a heated argument broke out in the family when Alana told her husband that divorce was inevitable. The next day, she met with a divorce lawyer and then left for a 3-day medical conference in another city. During this time, Muhammad sent her messages, pleading with her to reconsider and save the marriage, at least for the children. On November 30th, Alana returned home and made her final phone call to her parents. Her voice revealed some anxiety, but she assured them everything was fine. Later, it was discovered that she had tried calling the police that evening, but in her panic, misdialed one digit, leading to a tragic outcome. On December 1st, Anna couldn't reach her daughter, so she called her son-in-law to find out what had happened. Muhammad calmly told her that his wife had packed her bags in the middle of the night and fled to her lover, abandoning him and the children. Her parents didn't believe him, knowing their daughter would never leave her daughters and young son like that. They contacted a close friend of Alana's who lived nearby, asking her to discreetly watch the Shamji home while they took the first flight to Toronto and reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. Alana's friend reported that her car was still in the driveway, which only heightened the family's concern. Upon arriving at their daughter's house, they found nothing immediately suspicious. But Muhammad was agitated, saying they had called the police unnecessarily and insisting that Alana was with her lover. He had already told the police this version when they visited earlier. Following the report of Mrs. Frick Shamji's disappearance, body in a suitcase. In the early morning hours of December 2nd, a man walking his dog along the river about 24 miles from Shamji's home saw a large suitcase at the base of the bridge. He was initially going to pass it by, but curiosity got the better of him, especially since the suitcase looked almost new. When he opened it, he was horrified to find the lifeless body of a blonde woman inside. He immediately notified the police, and the suitcase and body were sent to the medical examiner's office for identification and to determine the cause and circumstances of death. There were no issues with identification, as the criminal hadn't even bothered to remove the luggage tag from the suitcase from Alana's recent trip to a conference. Her parents confirmed her identity. The body had multiple abrasions and bruises, but the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation and a broken neck. The woman was dressed in pajamas and had no shoes, and based on the position of her body, she had been placed in the suitcase immediately after her death. The young witness Muhammad was arrested that evening at a coffee shop where he was meeting with a lawyer. It was evident he was planning to leave the country, but he didn't have the chance. He was charged with first-degree murder, but the neurosurgeon denied any involvement. However, a horrific detail of the incident emerged. It turned out that the couple's eldest daughter, 12-year-old Yasmina, had accidentally witnessed her mother's assassination. According to the girl, she heard screams and noise coming from her parents' room and ran there. She cracked open the door and saw her father kneeling behind the bed. Her mother was likely lying on the floor, but Yasmina couldn't see her from the doorway. Muhammad yelled at his daughter, ordering her to leave immediately, shut the door behind her and go to bed. In the morning, he told the girls that their mother had left. Yasmina, despite her age, understood something terrible had happened, but couldn't imagine that her father had taken their mother's life. A confession, trial, and sentence. To spare his daughter from having to testify in court, the accused confessed and recounted what happened that dreadful evening. According to him, he and his wife argued about her infidelity and desire for a divorce. Muhammad claimed he didn't mean to harm Alana, but things escalated spontaneously. The argument turned physical, and she tried to call the police, but he knocked the phone from her hand. She began screaming, and Muhammad struck her multiple times in the face, then pinned her to the floor and strangled her with his hands. At this moment, their daughter walked in but couldn't see what was happening due to the bed. When Muhammad realized his wife wasn't breathing, he attempted to resuscitate her, but it was in vain, as in his rage, he had broken her neck. He then put her body in a large suitcase, loaded it into the trunk of his car, and drove around aimlessly for hours, unsure of what to do next. Upon reaching a small bridge over a river, he decided to throw the suitcase down, hoping the current would carry it away, making it impossible to find. However, in the darkness, he didn't see that the suitcase got stuck against the bridge's foundation. In fall 2017, while the trial of the criminal surgeon was underway, a new scandal erupted involving his father, Farid Shamji, who made disparaging remarks about his deceased daughter-in-law. He attempted to justify his son's actions, saying his wife had been unfaithful and provoked him. These comments led to an investigation into the elderly man, and his medical license was revoked. In April 2019, Muhammad was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, though with the possibility of parole in 14 years. Given the time served during the trial, he may be released as early as 2030. Moreover, Muhammad was forbidden from contacting his children or Alama's parents and ordered to pay them a large sum as compensation. He was also permanently stripped of his medical license. Washington Heights is a neighborhood in the northernmost part of the New York City borough of Manhattan. With a population of over 100,000, the neighborhood is home to a vibrant and diverse Latin American community. The neighborhood offers a unique cultural experience and a good number of recreational centers which attract several people. However, Washington Heights was known to have high crime rates, especially from the 60s to the early 90s. And it is here in that era that we begin our story. But first, to go back to the very beginning. Robert Worley, also known as Bobby Wells, was born on December 18, 1938. He was the last child of a family of 7, a family he didn't spend much time with before his arrest. In 1963, he was convicted of abuse and assault of a woman and ended up spending 3 years of his life in Sing Sing prison in upstate New York. After Bobby was released from prison in 1969, he changed his name from Robert Worley to Bobby Wells, and he moved in with his brother Fred Worley at Edgecombe Avenue in the Washington Heights neighborhood of Manhattan, New York City. There, he worked as a building superintendent for an apartment building. Bobby stayed with Fred for some time before he disappeared between 1966 and 1967, never to return. Fred and every other member of the family never heard from Bobby for more than 2 decades until 1993, when they got closure most unexpectedly. Fred received a call that his brother was found dead at an apartment that belonged to Dorian Corey, a deceased drag queen. Dorian Corey was born on June 6, 1937 in Buffalo, New York. She attended college at Parsons School of Design in the late 1950s. While Dorian was studying, she was drawn to the underground culture of the ballroom. Since then, Dorian appeared in drag queen beauty pageants. Dorian pushed for her name to be heard, and eventually she gained the fame that she worked for as a drag queen. She appeared in a game-changing documentary titled Paris is Burning, and also appeared on talk shows like The Joan Rivers Show to discuss the ball culture and other things. But even with that, Dorian needed to pay the bills, so she did extra work on the side. She worked out of her apartment as a seamstress, and at the same time, Dorian made her house a safe space for those in need of a home. Folks who came out with their true identity and were rejected by their family found comfort and love in Dorian's home, named House of Corey. In August 1993, Dorian was working with Pepper LaBeija, an American drag queen and fashion designer, on a ball at Webster Hall. Unknown to them, the ball would never take place. On August 29, 1993, 56-year-old Dorian died of AIDS. The 1980s were particularly horrendous for people with AIDS. There were no treatments, and everyone who had AIDS back then died pretty quickly. In the 90s, there were improvements, but there were not enough to cure the likes of Dorian. The whole neighborhood mourned Dorian, as she was one of the people they looked up to in the community. But no one knew the drag queen had a skeleton in her closet. After Dorian died, her belongings were left for her caregiver and friend, Lois Taylor, who sold Dorian's dresses as costumes and made money off them. Taylor would visit Dorian's home with her clients to look at the costume they needed every time there was a business deal. Dorian's apartment was the go-to for any kind of jaw-dropping costume at the time, and as she had worked as a dress and costume designer. It was not a large apartment, and in addition to her belongings, she had a lot of things stored that belonged to her brother. On October 19, 1993, almost 2 months after Dorian's death, Taylor was at her apartment on West 140th Street in Harlem, with one of her customers as usual for business. They were there in hopes of finding a good costume for Halloween. The apartment was filled with lots of fabrics, sequins and beads, tailpieces and elaborate gowns. A place so jam-packed that you could lose a small child in there. The search took them to a large closet space which was the size of a small bedroom, but they found nothing to their taste when they got to the closet. But among the dresses and costumes, a large musty garment bag caught their eyes. In hopes to get something better from the garment bag, Taylor moved closer to it, but discovered the bag was too heavy for her to move. After pulling it with the help of her customer, she saw that the bag was tightly sewn, and so she decided to loosen it. She handed a pair of scissors to her customer to use on the bag, but they stopped almost immediately, driven away by the foul odor that the bag gave off. Immediately, Taylor knew she wouldn't be able to go on with the search, and so she picked up her phone and dialed 911. The early 90s were busy years for the NYPD as they were working tirelessly to curb crimes in the city, especially in Manhattan. But as busy as they were, the call from Dorian's apartment was one they would never forget. The police arrived at the apartment and walked to the closet. They noticed the foul odor coming from the garment bag, an odor that was very common to what police called a DOA, or dead on arrival. The garment bag was transported to the medical examiner's office for examination. The police department also involved an anthropologist. The content of the bag was tightly wrapped in thick fabrics and sewn closed with precision, leaving nowhere to enter. Once the wrappings were undone, everyone cringed at the gruesome sight. Before them was the mummified body of a man, bound up and wrapped in plastic. He was folded into the fetal position with a bullet hole in his head. The body was in a dried and shriveled state, so it was difficult to know who he was or when he died. At the time, technology was not advanced enough to identify the remains. The police had a lot to do. They needed to find out the identity of the mummy, how he died, who or what killed and kept him there, the motive behind the murder, and the time it happened. But out of all of these questions, they were able to answer only a few. The identity was unknown, but they found a bullet hole in his head which suggested he was shot to death. In the bag, they also found beer can caps which they used as an indicator of approximately how long the person's remains had been kept there. The type of flip-tops found in the bag were a type that had not been used since the mid-70s. leaving the police to assume that the body had been concealed in there between 15 and 25 years before discovery. The police contacted the missing person squad to see if anyone was reported missing around the speculated time of death. But to make matters worse, there were no missing reports of anyone from that time. The only thing that could be done was to obtain a fingerprint from the mummy to identify the owner. The state of the body made it difficult for authorities to get a fingerprint from the fingers. Without the identity of the mummified body, the police would be unable to communicate properly regarding the case. And so the remains were named Joe Doe, a name given to unidentified bodies. The detective in charge of identifying Joe Doe, Detective Raul Figueroa, took permissions from his supervisors to remove the body's fingers and work on them. With the approval of his superiors, Detective Raul removed the fingers and placed them in 10 different specimen bottles. He also injected them with acetone to plump them up. Even Detective Raul was not 100% sure that his method was going to work. He could only hope that the method would help them to identify the body. Suddenly, the fingers started turning from nothing at all to fingers that could provide good prints. After that, they were able to put ink on them and roll them onto a fingerprint card to send to another unit. After the proper examination of the fingerprints, they finally got the answers they had been waiting for. Joe Doe was identified as Robert Worley, also known as Bobby Wells. But even after the authorities were able to uncover his identity, they still had a few questions. What was the relationship between Dorian Corey and Bobby Wells? Did Dorian kill Bobby? These questions remain difficult to answer as the two people involved in the case were both deceased. Nevertheless, the authorities continued their search for answers by trying to search for the friends and family of Dorian and Bobby to find any information that could lead to solving the mystery behind Bobby's death. The search led the police to Fred Worley, Bobby's brother. Fred explained how Bobby lived with him and his family and how he tried to talk Bobby out of his lifestyle. According to Fred, Bobby lived a crazy lifestyle where he would drink, get into trouble, and drink again. Whenever Fred tried to talk him out of it, alcohol got in the way. He kept trying to get Bobby to quit drinking, but it seemed he was too deep in it. According to Fred, Bobby got attracted to a woman who lived next door, but soon the relationship grew from sweet to sour. Bobby and the woman had a serious issue that involved the woman's 7-year-old son. Somehow Bobby hit the child and the woman threatened to call the police. Bobby, who had just been released from jail, knew if the woman called the police it would mean bigger trouble for him. And to avoid trouble, he fled the neighborhood without a word to anyone, even his brother. That was the last time Fred heard from Bobby, until he was called almost 25 years later and told that his brother had been found dead. When Fred was interviewed, he was asked if he was surprised to know that his brother was dead, and he said he was not really surprised because once they didn't hear from Bobby for many years, they had already assumed that something had befallen him. He was also asked if Bobby was friends with transvestites, people who wear clothes primarily associated with the other sex. Fred said he knew his brother was in a relationship with a certain transvestite. Bobby had mistakenly dialed Fred's contact one day when he was drunk, and he ranted about having issues with a transvestite. Fred didn't remember the name of the transvestite, but when he was asked if the name he heard was Dorian, he said that was the name. All the information that Fred gave the police didn't point to anyone as Bobby's murderer. It only made solving the case more difficult. The first person the police suspected after the 911 call at Dorian's apartment was Taylor, who made the call. But Taylor gave them a reason to eliminate her from the suspect list. She told the police she couldn't have possibly moved the bag with the body as it was far too heavy, and she weighed only 135 pounds. The case was, and still is, disturbing as a lot of questions are unanswered. Many of those who knew Dorian personally were very shocked to learn about the mummy in her closet all these years. While some were disappointed in Dorian, some didn't believe she would kill anyone. There were many speculations and theories about this case. Many friends of Dorian admitted that she was in a relationship with Bobby, and according to the friends, both Dorian and Bobby would always get drunk and violent with each other. Whenever they had too much to drink, they ended up fighting seriously. Fred also mentioned that he knew his brother to be macho and violent, and that he sometimes could go too far. Because of these accounts by friends, there's a theory that one of Dorian and Bobby's violent spats led to Dorian shooting Bobby in the head. Most people believe that Bobby had potentially been an abusive ex-lover of Dorian and that she may have shot him in self-defense when he was abusing her, as this was a common occurrence in the trans community. The abuse that became rampant in the trans community probably made Dorian own a handgun. Dorian's friend Jessie Torres affirmed during her interview that Dorian had a small .22 caliber. Many others maintain that Bobby was a burglar who broke into Dorian's home, prompting her to act in self-defense. Allegedly, Dorian attached a note to Bobby's body reading, "This poor man broke into my home and was trying to rob me." The note was never confirmed by police. However, this theory suggests Dorian kept the body because a drag queen like her, who lived in a poor and dangerous area in the 60s and 70s, had little chance of gaining sympathy from the police. According to Taylor, after she discovered the heavy bag, she found a short story written by Dorian. She said the story was written in the third person about a transgender woman who killed her lover in revenge. The lover had pressured the trans woman into having sex reassignment surgery. Many believe the story relates to Dorian's. She had a breast implant and had possibly taken female hormones. Therefore, the story references Dorian's life, including the Pearl Box Revue, which was a touring drag show she had performed with in the 60s. According to Trisha Zeigenhorn's article, Did You Know?, a friend of Dorian claimed that Dorian confessed on her deathbed to committing a murder. It is not clear if the police interviewed the said friend, but if they did, nothing came out of it. In spite of all these theories, some people believe Dorian had nothing to do with the killing. Lentelmi, who was also Dorian's friend, said he had been to her place several times and never smelled a foul odor aside from a musty stench he said was common in older New York City buildings. After the police spoke to some of Dorian's friends, they were thrown into more confusion as some implied that in 1988, Dorian moved from her apartment at 150th Street, St. Nicholas Avenue to one located 10 blocks over on West 140th Street. With this information, some posited that the body was in the closet of the apartment before Dorian moved in. Therefore, some believed that Dorian was probably hiding the body in her closet to protect the actual murderer. None of these theories were confirmed true by the police, as there was no valid evidence to back these claims and stories. However, the most accepted version was that Bobby was an abusive ex-lover who got shot in self-defense. Bobby's family didn't claim his body. He was buried on Hart Island off the coast of the Bronx in November 1993 in an area called Potter's Field. No funeral was held for Bobby. Dorian's ashes were also spread on City Island. And that's how the case of Bobby Wells remains a mystery today. All that Bobby's family knows is that he was murdered, but they are not sure who killed him or what led to his death. No one knows what happened except for Bobby and Dorian, who are both dead. Without any type of first-hand testimony from either of the two or both of them, we can agree that the mystery of how Bobby died and how he ended up mummified in a famous drag queen's closet will never be solved. But if Dorian truly killed Bobby, we could say she got away with murder. The case of Alice Adams and Tibor Vass. Alice Adams and Tibor Vass were colleagues at the Radisson Blu Edwardian Heathrow Hotel. Living just 6 miles from the hotel, Alice had joined the team 3 weeks prior and quickly formed friendships with her co-workers, particularly Tibor. Born and raised in Budapest, Hungary, Tibor was a people person who loved music, playing almost every instrument, with the piano being his favorite. He had taught his younger sister, Isabella, to play piano, and they would often perform together for their parents. Tragedy struck in 2007 when Tibor's father passed away, leaving the family struggling to cope. Tibor, then a teenager, took on a more significant role in supporting his mother, Rosalia, and younger sister. At 15, he started working full-time to help alleviate his mother's burden. He later applied to the University of Budapest in 2008, hoping a college degree would lead to a better job and greater financial stability for his family. Despite his exceptional talent, Tibor was unfortunately denied admission to the university. Tibor discussed his plans to move to Great Britain with his mother, who seemed to support the idea. In July 2010, at the age of 19, Tibor relocated to the United Kingdom and settled in London. He began working at the Radisson Blu Edwardian Heathrow Hotel, where he enjoyed his job, responsibilities, and interactions with colleagues and new clients. Tibor quickly formed a bond with Alice, a talented musician, as they often found common topics to discuss. Both Tibor and Alice worked as receptionists at the hotel, along with Attila Ban, a 31-year-old who had been employed there the longest. Attila was recognized as the hotel's best employee in 2010. As Tibor and Attila were both from Hungary, they developed a close relationship. The hotel provided accommodation for its new employees, and Attila and Tibor lived in a company apartment behind the hotel. This arrangement was convenient, as it saved them money and reduced their commute time. Tibor was thrilled to be in England, but he didn't abandon his plans for higher education. He reapplied to the university in Budapest and was accepted this time around. Overjoyed, he had to return to Hungary in August 2011. To bid him farewell, a small party was organized on August 9, 2011, attended by Tibor, Attila, Alice, and other hotel employees. The next day, the trio was scheduled to work, but none of them showed up. Their colleagues raised the alarm when they failed to report for work at 7 a.m., and the police were notified at 7:53 a.m. Upon arriving at the house, the police found the door unlocked and the interior quiet. When an officer opened the door, he was met with a disturbing scene. Alice lay on the living room floor, her face covered by a pillow with 22 stab wounds on her body, as later confirmed by the medical examiners. In the bedroom, Tibor's naked body was found on the bed, having died from 2 stab wounds to the heart. Attila, however, was nowhere to be found. The police surrounded the house to secure the area, and investigators and forensic experts started their investigation. As they examined the crime scene, they discovered that the bed where Tibor's body was found was not where he was actually killed. The bed was too tidy, indicating that Tibor had met his fate elsewhere. It appeared that the perpetrator had initially wounded him, removed his clothes, cleaned his body, and then placed him on the bed. Upon further inspection, the apartment was found to contain empty alcohol bottles and illicit substances, suggesting that they had been used during a party. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, the surrounding area, and the attic for Attila Ban, but he was nowhere to be found. His personal belongings, including his papers, were still in the apartment. As a result, Attila became the prime suspect in the investigation. While forensic experts continued to analyze the crime scene, investigators began questioning Attila's co-workers at the hotel. The staff reported that Attila had taken a particular interest in Tibor, a new employee from the same country, immediately showing him around and helping him settle in. Attila even went so far as to adjust his work schedule to match Tibor's. Tibor was a young and attractive man who attracted a lot of female attention. However, investigators discovered that Attila had romantic feelings for Tibor, which he openly expressed. According to the hotel staff, Tibor had rejected Attila's advances, making Attila unhappy. Things took a turn for the worse when Alice joined the hotel staff 3 weeks before her death and Tibor started paying attention to her. Attila became jealous despite knowing that Tibor was only interested in women. The investigation raised an important question. Could Attila have committed the murder out of jealousy and unrequited love? A disturbing Facebook post from Attila, made before the police discovered the bodies, suggested that he was indeed involved. At 6:23 a.m., Attila had posted, "I would like to wake up from that nightmare." Friends commented on the post, expressing their concern, but Attila never responded. This message further solidified the investigators' suspicions that Attila Ban was responsible for the deaths of his colleagues. The number of stab wounds provided a clear indication of what had transpired. Alice sustained 22 stab wounds, while Tibor was stabbed only twice. Furthermore, the positioning of the victims was telling. Alice was found on the floor with a pillow over her face, while Tibor was discovered on the bed. When investigators spoke with the other people who had been at the apartment earlier that night, they learned that Attila, Tibor, and Alice had been the only ones left behind. This suggested that the tragic events had unfolded after the others had left, in the hours leading up to dawn. The news of Alice's death sent shockwaves through the families of both the victim and the perpetrator. The Adams family, Alice's family, released a statement in which her mother, Sarah, paid a tribute to her daughter. She expressed her overwhelming grief, saying, "My heart is shattered into a million pieces. I will carry this sadness with me for the rest of my life." I deeply miss my beloved Alice and would do anything to have one more chance to hug her tightly and see her bright smile. The loss of my child has awakened intense emotions within our family, sorrow, anger, and a sense of devastation that we can hardly bear. As a mother, I feel that I failed to protect my child, and that realization is something I must confront every day. Not knowing exactly what happened to Alice on the night of her murder is a constant torment. I would rather face the harsh truth than be left to imagine the sequence of events that led to her death. Alice was an extraordinary and unique individual who brought so much love, joy, passion, and kindness into the lives of everyone she touched. Her loss is a tragedy that cannot be put into words. Meanwhile, police were searching for Attila Ban, but he seemed to have disappeared without a trace. When they attempted to track his phone, they found that it was transmitting signals from the same area as the hotel, which was unusual. It was later revealed that Attila was actually much closer than anyone had suspected. After spending 2 days examining the crime scene, the investigative team left the house, only to have the forensic team return later to conduct additional tests. Upon re-entering the house, they found that the door they had left unlocked was now locked from the inside. Inside the room, they discovered Attila Ban lying on the bed, intoxicated and wounded after attempting to harm himself with scissors and a knife. The investigators questioned Attila, but he responded bizarrely, using gestures to convey his thoughts. He was then taken to the hospital for medical attention. Unbeknownst to the investigators, Attila had created a hiding space within the sofa bed where Tibor Vass's body was found. To create this makeshift hiding spot, he had made a slit in the bed space, grabbed a phone, several bottles of water, and climbed inside. Throughout the investigation, Attila had been secretly watching and listening to the police through the holes he had made. Attila Ban was arrested at the hospital as the main suspect in the crime. His trial began on July 9, 2012, and during the proceedings, details of the heinous crime were revealed. The party had escalated out of control after Tibor, Alice, and Attila were left alone in the apartment. Prosecutors confirmed that there was a consensual physical encounter between them with DNA evidence found on Ms. Adams' body. The evening took a devastating turn. Attila claimed to have no memory of the events that followed, only recalling waking up the next morning to find Alice and Tibor lifeless. Overcome with guilt and remorse, he considered taking his own life but was too afraid to do so alone. The court learned that Attila had been consumed by jealousy towards Tibor, particularly after a team-building event where he had thrown a tantrum because Tibor was in a photograph and he was not. The situation worsened when Attila discovered that Tibor had been accepted into a university program in Hungary and would be leaving the UK soon. The final trigger was likely witnessing Tibor and Alice kissing, which sent Attila into a fit of rage, ultimately leading him to take the lives of his two friends. Prosecutor Richard Whittam revealed in court that Attila Ban was discovered naked on a single bed with injuries to his wrists, forearm, and neck. It was later found that he had been hiding in the base of a double bed. Remarkably, he had managed to conceal himself and remain undetected throughout the entire investigation, including the pathologist's examination, the removal of the crime scene examiner's investigation. When questioned about the oversight, Detective Inspector John Finch defended the police, stating that it would be impractical and potentially damaging to lift up every bed in search of people. He explained that this could result in the loss of crucial forensic evidence and was not a standard procedure in such cases. Rosalia, the mother of Tibor Vass, paid a heartfelt tribute to her son, remembering him as a friendly, outgoing, and talented young man. She recalled his childhood interests in music, arts, and sports, as well as his passion for photography, which led him to invest in a professional camera with his first paycheck. According to Rosalia, Tibor had many friends in both Hungary and the UK who appreciated his kind and supportive nature. She said that, on August 11th, I received devastating news. My 20-year-old son, Tibor, and his friend Alice had been murdered. The killer was a shocking revelation, Tibor's own friend, who I had trusted to look out for my son. This friend had personally promised to keep Tibor safe, which made the news even more difficult to accept. Days before, I had taken comfort in knowing that Tibor had found a mature and intelligent friend in London. Now, I was consumed by grief and struggled to comprehend the tragedy. The subsequent police investigation and trial only added to my suffering, forcing me to relive the horrors of that fateful night. The pain and loss my family experiences will stay with us for the of our lives. The perpetrator, Attila Ban, pleaded guilty but claimed he couldn't recall the details of the crime. On July 18, 2012, the jury delivered a guilty verdict after just 5 hours of deliberation. A month later, on August 17th, Attila Ban was sentenced to 2 life terms. He will have to serve 26 years before being eligible for parole. Laurel is a small city located in Yellowstone County, Montana, with a population of just over 7,000 people. It is known for its friendly community and picturesque surroundings. The city is situated along the Yellowstone River, which provides numerous opportunities for outdoor recreation, such as fishing and kayaking. Laurel also has a historic downtown district with charming shops and restaurants. Overall, Laurel offers a peaceful and welcoming atmosphere that is perfect for those looking to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. And it is here our story begins. In contrast to the quiet town of Laurel, Miranda Colleen Fenner's birthplace of Sacramento was a bustling city located in California. She was born on December 26, 1979 to Mike and Sherry Fenner. She was not an only child, but had a younger brother by the name of Tim. When Miranda was just 11 years old, her family packed up their belongings and moved to Laurel, Montana. Despite leaving her childhood friends and familiar surroundings, Miranda adapted quickly and soon made new friends in her new home. She attended Laurel High School, where she excelled both academically and socially. But it wasn't just books and academics that kept her busy. She also had a creative side that she nurtured by spending time with her loved ones, drawing, and exploring the latest trends in fashion. Whether it was indulging in a shopping spree with her gal pals or sketching her latest design, Miranda always found joy in the little things in life. After years of hard work, finally graduated from Laurel High School in May 1998, proud of all she had accomplished. Fresh out of high school, Miranda was ready to take on the world. It wasn't long before an opportunity presented itself in the form of a job at the movie store, a charming video rental store located at 419 Main Street in Laurel. Miranda loved her job and quickly became a familiar face to the store's regulars. With her infectious smile, she greeted every customer with enthusiasm and a willingness to help. The store was only a stone's throw away from her family home, and Miranda often walked to and from work, taking in the sights and sounds of her beloved town. Miranda was content with her life, but fate can be cruel, and tragedy soon struck like a bolt of lightning on a clear day. On Sunday, November 15th, 1998, just a few minutes past 8 p.m., the Laurel Police Department received a frantic call reporting a shooting at the movie store where 18-year-old Miranda worked. The caller, who had been driving by, noticed a woman desperately trying to crawl out of the doorway of the video store and immediately pulled over to help. He said that as he approached, he realized with horror that the woman seemed to have been shot in the neck and was fighting for her life. Police officers rushed to the scene, their sirens wailing as they sped through the quiet streets. When they arrived on the scene, they were met with a shocking sight. 3 people huddled around a woman who lay in a pool of blood directly to the right of the front door of the video rental store. The officers immediately rushed to her aid, but it was clear that she was in bad shape. Her body was drenched in blood, making it difficult for them to determine where the injuries were. She was unconscious and unresponsive, with only a weak pulse to indicate that she was still alive. The officers knew they had to act quickly to save her life. As they worked to stabilize her, they noticed the deep slashing injuries to her neck and their hearts sank. They wondered if a shooting had taken place or if something even more sinister was at play. The officers called for medical personnel to respond to the area, and they continued to do everything in their power to keep the victim alive. It was a race against time. The evening air was thick with tension and fear as an ambulance pulled up to the scene of the shooting. The officers worked quickly as they helped to move the badly injured victim into the ambulance. The ambulance then raced through the streets, its sirens blaring as it rushed towards a nearby location where a helicopter was waiting to take the victim to St. Vincent Hospital in Billings. As they arrived at the hospital, the victim was whisked away to an operating room, where a team of skilled surgeons worked tirelessly. The hospital was filled with a sense of urgency, and everyone worked together with a singular purpose to save the victim's life. It didn't take long for the victim to be identified as none other than Miranda. Meanwhile, back at the movie store, a flurry of activity was going on. Police officers had made their way in through the back door of the store, which they noticed was slightly open. Inside, chaos reigned supreme. The store was in complete disarray. But that wasn't the worst part. There was a trail of blood leading from the back of the store to the front door where Miranda had evidently crawled in agony. The officers were shocked by all they saw. After securing the scene of the crime, they quickly notified the command staff and detectives from both the Laurel Police Department and the Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office. When detectives arrived, they quickly got to work. They took measurements and sketches of the outside of the store before swiftly moving inside. The scene was gruesome, and the detectives couldn't help but feel a twinge of horror as they checked for fingerprints and footprints. The flash of cameras filled the room as they photographed the scene, capturing every last detail. In their pursuit of justice, they seized several physical items that could help bring the perpetrator to justice. As they worked, patrol officers also scoured the surrounding area, knocking on doors and talking to locals, hoping to gather more information and identify witnesses. One of the officers, simply identified as Officer Wells, was soon dispatched from the crime scene to St. Vincent Hospital to check on the condition of Miranda and to secure any valuable evidence that might help in the investigation. Upon arriving, he was quickly escorted to the operating room, where he donned a sterile gown and entered the operating room. There, he witnessed the surgeon's valiant efforts to save Miranda's life. But sadly, at 10:01 p.m., she was declared dead. Her injuries were just too severe. It was a heartbreaking moment for everyone. The news of Miranda's death spread like wildfire and soon reached her family's ears. The weight of the tragedy hit them like a ton of bricks, leaving them devastated and struggling to come to terms with the reality of what had happened. The following day, November 16th, 1998, an autopsy was conducted on Miranda's body by Dr. Tom Bennett, who was assisted by Dr. Ken Mueller. As they examined her, they discovered the brutal truth. Miranda had been stabbed and slashed in the throat, leaving her with no chance of survival. The only other wound they found was a defensive laceration on her right index finger. With heavy hearts, they classified her death as a homicide. In the wake of Miranda's tragic death, detectives and law enforcement officers began an intense investigation to catch the killer. They left no stone unturned, interviewing hundreds of people and combing through every possible lead. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to locate a suspect or identify a clear motive for the crime. It was noted that a small amount of cash had been taken from the video store's register, so the detectives could not entirely rule out the possibility that robbery was a motive. The days that followed were filled with frustration and despair as the investigation seemed to hit one dead end after another. Despite months passing by, the case remained open and active, and detectives continued to work tirelessly to uncover any leads. Meanwhile, Miranda's family refused to give up hope, and they took matters into their own hands. They printed posters with Miranda's picture and the haunting words, "Murdered in Montana," and plastered them across the country. Their determination to find justice for Miranda never wavered, even in the face of uncertainty and grief. It was a hot July day in 2000, just 2 years after the brutal murder of Miranda, when Dawson County Sheriff's deputies received a tip about a man they wanted to question in connection with a traffic-related incident. The officers spotted the man, whose identity they did not reveal, in the city of Glendive, Montana, and attempted to stop him. But before they could even approach him, the man pulled out a gun and shot one of the deputies in the leg. In an instant, the peaceful town turned into a chaotic scene as officers scrambled for cover and returned fire. The exchange ended with the man losing his life. The news of the man's death soon sparked a new wave of rumors and speculation about Miranda's unsolved murder. It was said that he had made some shocking claims before his death. Claims that he was involved in the brutal killing of Miranda in 1998. These rumors were enough to catch the attention of the then Yellowstone County Sheriff Chuck Maxwell. He was determined to leave no stone unturned in his quest to bring Miranda's killer to justice. He dispatched 2 of his best detectives to Glendive to investigate any possible links between the man who was shot and killed and the death of Miranda. After an extensive investigation, the detectives reported that the rumors were unfounded and unconfirmed. The search for Miranda's killer continued. Years passed after this, and the murder remained unsolved. In February 2006, the case was thrust into the limelight, this time on a national TV talk show called The Montel Williams Show. Sherry, Miranda's heartbroken mother, appeared on the show with psychic Sylvia Brown, who claimed to have some insight about the case. During the show, Sylvia revealed that she believed the killers were customers at the video store and had been loitering there. The psychic also shared that 2 men, aged 19 and 24, were responsible for Miranda's death and that they lived within a 5-mile radius of the store. Despite her emotional turmoil and skepticism of the psychic Sylvia, Sherry believed that being on the show was vital to bring Miranda's case to the attention of a larger audience. In the end, it wasn't about her doubts or fears, but about honoring her daughter's memory and finding justice for her senseless death. The Montel Williams Show proved to be a turning point in Miranda's case. After the show aired, Sherry began receiving a flood of phone calls and letters from people who had watched the program. Sherry was overwhelmed with hope and made it her mission to pass all the information she received to the detectives working on Miranda's case. However, despite the seemingly positive leads, detectives were unable to uncover any concrete evidence that would lead them to Miranda's killer. Years went by, but Sherry never lost hope. She continued to receive tips and leads about the brutal murder of her daughter Miranda. Every time she received new information, it was like opening up old wounds. But she knew that even the tiniest lead could be the key to finally finding her daughter's killer. In 2012, with an unwavering determination, Sherry printed new reward posters with Miranda's photo and the headline, "Justice for Miranda," in bold letters. The posters offered a $25,000 reward and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. The posters were distributed not only in their state, but also across the country, as Sherry refused to rest until justice was served. It was a glimmer of hope for Miranda's family when the Billings Police Department's cold case unit was established in March of 2012. Finally, there was a dedicated team of detectives to work on unsolved murders. Miranda's murder case was transferred to the unit, and they didn't waste any time in redoubling their efforts to solve the case. 2 detectives, Frank Fritz and Shane Bancroft, took charge of the investigation, poring over old leads and finding new ones. Other detectives who were part of the cold case unit and working on Miranda's murder were confident that justice would finally be served. They knew that people in the community had information that could break the case wide open. With new technological advances in DNA testing and a constant stream of tips and leads, they were convinced that the killer's days were numbered. In October 2013, a woman named Beverly Saylor contacted authorities, claiming that she had valuable information regarding the homicide of Miranda Fenner. Detective Bancroft was assigned to speak with her over the phone, and what she revealed left him stunned. Beverly was previously married to a man named David Saylor, who had children from a previous marriage. At the time of Miranda's murder, they were living in Laurel. Beverly said that she believed David's stepson Zachary O'Neill was involved in the crime and described him as a violent person. She recounted specific incidents that deeply troubled her and painted a disturbing picture of Zachary's personality. According to Beverly, her husband mentioned on several occasions over the years that Zachary had rented a movie on the night of the homicide. She left Montana shortly after the murder, but was now returning, which brought up memories and motivated her to call the authorities. Detective Bancroft was grateful for the information, but knew they had to investigate further to see if there was any truth to Beverly's claims. As he dug deeper, he found that while Zachary did live in the area at the time of the homicide, there was no other evidence linking him to the crime. It was yet another frustrating dead end for the detectives. As the years passed, various people even stepped forward to confess to the murder of Miranda, but each claim turned out to be a false lead, causing the detectives to end up chasing false confessions. The case seemed to be stuck in a never-ending loop of dashed hopes and futile attempts at closure. In a surprising twist of events, in April 2016, Zachary, the stepson who had been implicated by his former stepmother, made a shocking confession while at a psychiatric hospital in Spokane, Washington. He claimed to be responsible for the murder of Miranda. However, detectives were skeptical of his confession and considered him non-credible, since the details he provided were already widely known. In addition, Zachary had also taken responsibility for a second murder that had not occurred, and this even further cast doubt on his credibility. As a result, detectives were forced to redirect their focus elsewhere in their pursuit of justice for Miranda. Almost a year later, on March 19, 2017, none other than Zachary walked into the Yellowstone County Detention Facility and asked to speak to deputies. As he was led into the interview room, the deputies couldn't help but notice that he didn't seem well. He appeared to be high on something, and they wondered what was going on with him. It was déjà vu as Zachary repeated the same story he had told almost a year earlier. He had murdered Miranda at the movie store in Laurel. He explained that he had been in and out of jails and prisons over the past several years, and that he had tried telling medical staff in Spokane about what he had done, but they did not take him seriously. He then went on to reveal that he had used methamphetamine, which explained his current state. After Zachary's confession, the deputies wasted no time in informing Detective Fritz of his revelation. The detective was determined to get to the bottom of the case, so he promised to contact Zachary the next day. Concerned about Zachary's well-being, one of the deputies offered to give him a ride to a crisis center. As they drove, the deputy urged Zachary to keep his phone charged and ready for a call from the detectives. Zachary nodded in agreement. 2 days later, on March 21, 2017, Zachary went to the Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office to meet with Detectives Fritz and Bancroft. As they escorted him to a conference room, Zachary's face was stained with tears. Detectives inquired about the cause of his distress, and Zachary revealed that he had seen the Miranda reward posters in the lobby, which had triggered a wave of emotions within him. As Zachary sat in front of the detectives, he was visibly nervous and fidgety. Detective Bancroft noticed Zachary's unease and tried to make him feel at ease by letting him know that he wasn't there to arrest him. They read him his rights, and Zachary acknowledged that he understood. The detectives made it clear that they would need time to verify the truthfulness of whatever he was going to tell them before taking any action. Zachary then hesitated and revealed his desire to inform his parents before going public with the information. The detectives nodded, reassuring him there was no need to rush and that they would give him time to speak to his parents. As Zachary began his confession, he took the detectives back in time to his teenage years. He recounted that he had been living in Spokane but had returned to Laurel around May of 1988, at the young age of 18. He claimed he lived with his stepfather David Saylor at 702 West 12th Street. Zachary admitted to spiraling down into the depth of drug addiction, committing thefts and burglaries to fund his habits. He soon began to talk about the day of the homicide. He revealed that he had been at home with his mother on that fateful day when she asked him to rent some movies. Due to this, he drove to the movie store and rented 4 or 5 movies, including an adult film. He described the car he drove at the time and said he paid cash for the rentals. The detectives confirmed that the account linked to Zachary's stepdad David was used to rent 4 movies at 5:04 p.m. on the evening of the homicide. As Zachary spoke, he recalled vivid details about that fateful day. Miranda, wearing a blue shirt and glasses, had done nothing to provoke him when he rented the movies. But when he returned home, his mother was enraged upon discovering the adult film he rented and had ordered him to take it back. He took the film back to the movie store, and that was when he decided to rob it. He waited until other customers left, then pulled out a small .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol and demanded money from Miranda. She complied, and he took the cash without harming her. But then his paranoia kicked in, and he took Miranda to a back room where he described in detail how he tied her up with tape so that he could make his escape. However, the thought of her being a witness still bothered him, so he reached for his knife and slit her throat. As Zachary recounted this gruesome scene to the detectives, he broke down into tears. He recounted that he had then panicked when he thought he had heard someone coming and fled out the back door, leaving Miranda behind, mortally wounded. Detectives leaned in, their eyes fixed on Zachary as he described the chilling details of how he supposedly took Miranda's life, But their questioning wasn't over yet. They needed to know if this was the first time he had heard someone. The answer was far more sinister than they could have ever imagined. Zachary's voice quivered as he confessed to a brutal misconduct and attempted murder that had occurred just 1 month before Miranda's murder. The victim? A woman he had seen on broad water. Someone he decided to prey on. With a coldness that sent shivers down the detective's spines, Zachary recounted how he had cut her throat and left her for dead. But then a shocking revelation. He had worn a condom during the attack and believed he had left it behind when he fled the scene. The detectives listened in horror as Zachary explained that he thought the victim had survived because her death hadn't been reported in the news. But why had he tried to kill her in the first place? Zachary's answer was simple. He was afraid of going to prison. As the interview progressed, detectives asked Zachary what had driven him to come forward after all these years. He spoke of the guilt and remorse that had plagued him ever since his stepbrother perished in a fire back in 2013. Zachary revealed that he had been struggling with depression and had considered taking his own life, and that he felt it was finally time to own up to his crimes. The detectives were no doubt stunned by the level of detail and consistency in his account. But despite this, they remained skeptical, and this led them to ask him why they should believe him. To this, Zachary confidently responded that he knew specific details that were never released to the public. The detectives couldn't believe Zachary just yet, because they knew that a confession alone was not enough to prove guilt under Montana law. They needed more concrete evidence to ensure justice was served. As the interrogation came to a close, the detectives made one last move to ensure that they had all the evidence they needed to solve the case. With Zachary's permission, they obtained buccal swabs from him to collect a DNA sample. The swabs were carefully packaged and sent to the Montana Forensic Division for analysis, where they hoped that the results would be the final piece of the puzzle that would bring justice to Miranda. After their interview with Zachary, Detective Fritz and Bancroft worked to corroborate his confession. They began by investigating the other case Zachary mentioned. Their research led them to an unsolved cold case with the Billings Police Department, which they immediately shared with Detective Kruger. As they compared notes, Detective Kruger became convinced that Zachary's admissions lined up with the brutal abuse of a newspaper carrier named Julia Lilly then on September 5, 1998. With this in mind, Detective Kruger took the DNA evidence from the case and compared it to the buccal swab obtained from Zachary. And on April 18, 2017, the Montana Forensic Division reported the astonishing news. The DNA profile from a condom found at the scene of the crime matched Zachary's. The evidence was undeniable, and Zachary's long-hidden crimes were finally coming to light. Detectives Fritz and Bancroft did not stop there. Their investigation led them to a friend of Zachary's, simply identified as SB. During an interview with detectives in May 2017, SB revealed that he had known Zachary since he was a young boy, and that Zachary had a history of violent tendencies. SB recounted specific instances of Zachary's violent behavior, and also disclosed that Zachary had confessed to him about killing Miranda 2 months before he confessed to the detectives. SB was devastated by Zachary's confession, especially because he knew Miranda and her family. SB went on to tell detectives about Zachary's stepbrother, who had died in a fire in 2013. Zachary had been seeking justice for his stepbrother's death, and when the people involved were convicted, he thought justice had been served. SB said he told Zachary that Miranda's family also deserved to have justice done, and he said he encouraged Zachary to turn himself in. SB claimed he drove Zachary to the sheriff's office for his interview with detectives in March of 2017. The detectives were amazed by SB's stories, and it gave them another piece of evidence to add to the puzzle. That same May of 2017, detectives Fritz and Bancroft made their way to Spokane, Washington for another round of questioning with Zachary. As soon as Zachary started talking, the detectives realized they had not heard everything yet. This time Zachary confessed to violating a third woman. He didn't shy away from the details as he recounted how he found her and took her to Riverfront Park, where he took advantage of her. The detectives were horrified, but they pressed on with their questioning. Zachary maintained that he had not killed or hurt the woman beyond the violation. The detectives listened closely, knowing that every piece of information that he gave them could potentially help them bring justice to his victims. In early 2019, Detective Fritz was determined to find any case that could be connected to Zachary's heinous crimes. With Autumn Fry's help, they searched through records of defilement cases reported in 1998. And there it was, a case that occurred in Riverfront Park on September 12, 1998, just a week after the abuse of Julia, the newspaper carrier. As Detective Fritz dug deeper, he found eerie similarities between the victim's reports and Zachary's account of the events. The victim had been examined at a hospital and DNA evidence was recovered. Detective Fritz decided to test this DNA evidence against the sample collected from Zachary, and the results were undeniable. It was a match. This only further corroborated Zachary's story. Sadly, the victim in this case had passed away in 2013. But Detective Fritz was more determined than ever to bring justice to all those who were victimized by Zachary. After discovering all of the compelling evidence against Zachary, the detectives knew it was finally time to take action. Now, following their interview with Zachary in Spokane, Washington back in May 2017, he had gotten into trouble and was already serving a prison sentence for burglary and possession of firearms since December 2017, with the release date set for 2024. However, Zachary was eventually transferred from Washington to Montana to face charges for the brutal murder of Miranda and the abuse and attempted murder of the newspaper carrier in September 1998. Prosecutors decided not to charge him with the third crime, possibly because the victim had already passed away. On July 23, 2019, a hearing was held in a Montana courtroom where Zachary was formally charged with both crimes. Without hesitation, he pleaded guilty. Sentencing for both crimes was set for the following month, August, and Zachary agreed to remain in Montana until then. The day of reckoning finally arrived, August 23, 2019. Emotions ran high inside the district courtroom where Zachary was to be sentenced. He was brought in, shackled, in chains and handcuffs. As people settled in their seats, District Court Judge Jessica Fair made an announcement, warning everyone that any outbursts would not be tolerated. She singled out Zachary, reminding him that officers were present in the courtroom. The tension in the room was palpable and everyone held their breath waiting for what was to come. The courtroom listened intently as Detective Bancroft testified, recounting how Zachary became a suspect in the case years after being overlooked. Then the air grew still as Julia, Zachary's victim from the September 5, 1998 attack, bravely took the stand. She shared the harrowing details of that fateful day, describing it as the worst of her life and the day she came face to face with pure evil. As Julia recounted how Zachary abused her and stabbed her repeatedly in the jaw, throat, hands, and arms, the room was filled with sniffles and tears. She described how she tried to reason with her attacker, telling him she was a single mother with cancer, but to no avail. The attack left her permanently injured with limited mobility and a lifetime of pain. But the trauma didn't end there, so Julia was left to grapple with depression, anxiety in the aftermath of the attack. It was a powerful testimony that left many in the courtroom moved and saw prosecutors asking for the stiffest of penalties for Zachary. Tension filled the courtroom as Miranda's parents took the stand. The pain of their loss was still fresh and raw, and the sight of Zachary sitting in chairs before them only added fuel to their emotions. When Sherry, Miranda's mother, began to speak, her voice quivered with barely contained rage. She glared at Zachary and called him a vicious monster, spitting out the words with venom. She went on to say that she could not find any forgiveness in her soul for the despicable acts he had committed against her daughter. Her words echoed through the courtroom, leaving no doubt that Zachary's actions had forever shattered the lives of everyone he had hurt. When Zachary's defense attorney, Chris Copenhaver, took the stand, she painted a different picture of her client. She revealed how Zachary's addiction to meth began at the tender age of 10 and grew stronger as the years went by. However, Copenhaver told the court that Zachary had undergone a transformation since confessing his crimes to law enforcement. She believed he had the capacity for change and that he deserved the second chance. In a last-ditch effort to humanize Zachary, his biological father Mark O'Neill and his sister took the stand to offer their support. They expressed their heartfelt apologies to Miranda's family and expressed their hope for them to move forward despite the heart-wrenching ordeal they had gone through. It was soon time for the sentencing, and the courtroom held its collective breath as all eyes turned to Judge Jessica as she delivered Zachary's fate. The tension was palpable and the silence was deafening as the judge declared the sentence that Zachary would be forced to serve. She handed him not one, not two, but 3 life sentences for the atrocities he had committed against Miranda and Julia. But that wasn't all. Zachary was also designated as a level 3 high-risk violent offender, which means that he would be closely monitored for the rest of his life. The severity of his crimes demanded that he be kept off the streets, and the judge made it clear that he would not be eligible for parole until he had served a minimum of 30 years behind bars. The weight of the sentence hung heavy in the courtroom as Zachary was led away knowing that he would spend the rest of his days paying for the horrors he had inflicted upon his victims. And with that, the case of Miranda Fenner came to a close. A man who had evaded justice for so long was finally held accountable for his heinous crimes. Although justice was served, the scars of his actions will forever remain with the victims and their families. But if Zachary had not confessed to the crimes, the case of Zoe Hastings. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas, as the oldest of 5 children. She was a responsible sibling, often putting her parents' needs before her own. Her family was deeply rooted in their faith, spending a significant amount of time at church. When Zoe was in high school, her family moved to Dallas, where she attended a school that fostered her creativity and passion for the arts. She excelled in drawing and enjoyed participating in school plays. Outside of school, Zoe worked at an art studio and as a lifeguard during her summer breaks. After graduating, Zoe had the opportunity to attend top universities, but she decided to delay her education to focus on her church. In October 2015, at the age of 18, Zoe was preparing for a mission trip with her church. She planned to attend the Sunday service to discuss the trip's details. Zoe left her house around 4:40 p.m. in the family minivan, promising her parents she would return for dinner. However, she failed to come back, which was unusual for her. Zoe's parents tried to reach her after the service, but she didn't respond to their messages or calls. They then contacted her friends, thinking she might have visited someone, but no one had seen her. As the evening wore on, her parents grew increasingly worried and decided to call the church to see if Zoe had shown up there. However, they were surprised to learn that Zoe had never arrived at the church. This was highly unusual behavior for Zoe, as she had always kept her parents informed of her current whereabouts and had never disappeared without explanation. So they drove themselves to the police station to report Zoe missing, and the police began the search. The police spent all night retracing the route from Zoe's house to the church but found no sign of Zoe. Using an iPhone tracking app, police were able to locate her phone. They discovered Zoe's phone just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the street. Zoe's parents rushed to the creek. An officer approached them and informed them that a car accident had been reported a few hours earlier and that police had received a call from a witness walking a dog. That witness claimed that a man had approached him and said that a woman had been injured in a car accident near the creek. The witness rushed to the scene and found a woman lying in a pool of blood, so he called 911. As the police investigated, they quickly identified the victim as Zoe Hastings. However, it soon became clear that she had not died as a result of the accident. The evidence suggested that she had been murdered. Zoe's body was found a short distance from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a significant amount of blood near her body and police observed multiple cuts on her neck. Her dress was pulled up and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to suspect that the killer had likely assaulted and abused her. The police prevented Zoe's parents from approaching her body, shielding them from the gruesome scene. As they investigated further, they discovered several clues. Notably, all the minivan doors except the driver's side were locked, suggesting that the perpetrator may have driven the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. Beneath the bridge, about 10 feet from the creek, a blood-stained knife was discovered. It's likely that this was the weapon used in Zoe's murder. By examining her phone records and GPS data, investigators established that Zoe had arrived at the creek by 5:01 p.m. after leaving home at 4:41 p.m. GPS revealed she drove there in approximately 20 minutes, indicating her death probably occurred within a few minutes of arrival. To account for this timeline, investigators reconstructed her activities that afternoon, tracing her home. During the examination, investigators uncovered evidence Zoe visited the nearby DVD rental store after departing home to return a DVD she borrowed from that rental shop situated beside a Walgreens, near her place of residence. More than 50 people near that area had confirmed it. Among them had been Lester Clark, a tattoo shop employee who had worked next door to the DVD store. It wasn't until a few hours after work around 4:45 p.m. that Lester revealed he had seen a female customer who had been shopping at the store and had approached her. Lester admitted to having witnessed Zoe going to the DVD rental store. Lester added that he saw a man behaving suspiciously near the crime scene. Lester described the man as short and heavily built, an African American. However, Lester was too far away to notice any other distinguishing features. Later that evening, Lester saw the same man walking towards the store alone. The second witness, Gary Whitman, a homeless man, corroborated Lester's account. At around 4:45 p.m., Gary saw a woman approaching a white minivan in the parking lot. A man then approached her from behind, preventing her from entering the vehicle. The man showed her something from his pocket and the woman subsequently got into the car, moving to the passenger seat. The man then drove away. Gary also described the suspect as short and heavily built, an African American, and found the situation highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911, but it is unclear if the clerk made the call. During the investigation, experts made several key discoveries. A forensic pathologist examined Zoe's body and found a small amount of male semen, indicating that Zoe had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. However, the amount of semen was too small to conduct a full DNA analysis. Investigators analyzed Zoe's car for any foreign fingerprints on the doors or steering wheel, but found none. This discovery, combined with witness statements, suggested that the killer may have driven Zoe away in her minivan. However, the lack of fingerprints did not mean that the killer did not drive the car, as they may have wiped down the surfaces after the crime. When examining Zoe's body, investigators found several hairs, but they were too small to extract a full DNA sample from. However, a breakthrough came when a DNA sample was found on a knife near the crime scene. The DNA was matched to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran, who had a violent criminal history, including arrests for theft, assault, and home invasion. 1 year before the murder, Antonio was accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old girl, the daughter of his girlfriend. According to the girl, Antonio offered her a ride, but took her to a secluded area and assaulted her. He was arrested and claimed that the sex was consensual, but the prosecution was unable to prove his guilt, and he was acquitted. Antonio became the prime suspect in the murder investigation. As a result, he was arrested. However, during the interrogation, Antonio denied any involvement in the crime. To gather more evidence, investigators collected a DNA sample from Antonio and compared it to the semen found on the victim's body. Unfortunately, both DNA samples were too small for a full analysis, so the experts used a different method. The partial DNA profiles from the hair and semen were then compared to Antonio's DNA. The results showed that it was match, but not definitively. Meanwhile, detectives searched Antonio's smartphone and found some incriminating text messages. On the day before the murder, Antonio sent a message to a friend he lived with, stating he was moving out and would never see him again. At 1:48 a.m. the next day, Antonio sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother had died right in front of him. But this information was later found to be false. In the hour leading up to Zoe's death, Antonio sent 2 texts to another woman, revealing that he had been drinking, driving around the city, and crying. These messages were his last before the incident. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., Antonio texted a friend, expressing confusion and despair about his life. The next day, he sent a message to his ex-girlfriend, stating that his life was over and that she would soon understand why. Detectives investigating Antonio's online activities found that he had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, with a particular focus on the crime sections. Notably, 5 of these accesses were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. This was unusual, as prior to the death of Zoe, Antonio rarely visited news sites. His browser history also showed a single visit to a page about gang activity. Further investigation of Antonio's smartphone revealed GPS data that, at 4:34 p.m., Antonio's phone connected to a cell tower covering the area where the store was located, coinciding with the time Zoe was there. Although this data was not conclusive evidence, it suggested that Antonio's phone was in the vicinity of the store just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. This was significant, as Antonio's home was far away, and his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower throughout the day. Detectives discovered that Antonio had started working at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. However, on the day after the murder, he skipped his shift without providing any explanation. Despite the extensive circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the strongest evidence remained his DNA on the knife handle. Nevertheless, this evidence alone might not be enough for a conviction, as merely holding a knife does not prove involvement in the murder. It is possible that Antonio used the knife in a different context, and someone else could have used it to commit the crime. Since no other evidence was found, detectives decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its report of the events. According to the prosecution, Antonio approached Zoe in the parking lot, threatening her with a knife and forcing her to get into her car. He then took the driver's seat and drove away. The prosecution argued that Antonio, who was emotionally distressed due to the death of a relative and intoxicated from consuming a significant amount of alcohol. The investigators' theory was that Antonio had intended to assault Zoe when he abducted her. He chose his victim, Zoe, by chance when he spotted her in the parking lot. Antonio saw an opportunity to commit a crime and acted on it. He then drove to a secluded creek area that was difficult to spot due to the surrounding trees and low-lying terrain. At this location, he forced Zoe out of the car and attacked her, stabbing her 6 times in the neck area. Antonio got back into the car and tried to drive it into the creek, possibly to hide any remaining evidence. However, the car only partially submerged, allowing Antonio to potentially wipe his fingerprints from the steering wheel and door handle before fleeing the scene and return to the store, where Lester had seen him according to initial testimony. The defense argued that most of the evidence was not convincing enough and did not prove Antonio's guilt. For example, hair analysis only showed that the DNA could not be ruled out as belonging to Antonio, but it did not confirm his involvement. DNA on the knife also did not necessarily prove that Antonio committed murder. The defense argued that Antonio could have touched the knife under different circumstances before working at the store. They suggested he might have used the knife while working at a movie theater, where he sometimes collected items left behind by visitors. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, if someone had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to be careful to avoid removing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been a difficult task. The defense attempted to downplay the testimony of the second witness, Gary, by revealing that Gary had a warrant for his arrest due to a parole violation. They tried to exclude Gary's testimony, but the prosecution argued that Gary's willingness to cooperate with police, despite the risk of arrest, proved his sincerity. Gary insisted he wanted to do the right thing, even if it meant getting arrested. Antonio's argued that their client was elsewhere at the time of Zoe's murder, in order to helping a friend, but they failed to provide any substantial evidence to support this claim. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but as the trial progressed, they realized this would be difficult to achieve with the available evidence. They dropped the request for the death penalty. After a lengthy deliberation, the jury found Antonio guilty of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents expressed gratitude to the investigators and all those involved in the trial for delivering justice for their daughter. Her father shared that he had always warned his children about the dangers of the world and had taken every precaution to protect them. However, despite his efforts, His eldest daughter was abducted just a short distance from their home, and he was powerless to prevent it. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.